Gravedigger, a Day Brandstetter mystery, Book 6. Author, Joseph Hansen. Publisher, Open Road Integrated Media, New York. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 6. It was lonely country, lifting gently toward ragged mountains, through low hills, velvet with new green from winter rains, hills strewn with white rocks and clumps of brush, and slashed here and there by ravines dark with big live oaks. An 8-lane freeway had brought him into the hills from the seacoast. 40 clean, sleek miles of new cement leading God knew where. Nobody driving it but him, under low-hanging clouds, dark and tattered, spattering the windshield with squalls of rain. One minute, the next minute, letting shafts of sunlight through. He began to pass vineyards that stripped the hills, and then shaggy groves of avocado leaves and limbs drooping from the heaviness of the rain. He rolled down the window of the Triumph to breathe the clean air, the smell of rain on soil. Rain touched his face. A meadowlark sang. He wished that Cecil were with him. And then here was the green and white road sign warning him that Buenos Ventos could be reached by taking the next off-ramp. The off-ramp was a graceful broad curve, but it brought him to a meager strip of worn and winding blacktop. This climbed down to the groves, the vineyards, into the first and least of the mountains. Patches of snow began to show under clumps of brush and to the lee sides of rock outcrops. The sky darkened, and the good winds for which the place was named turned mean, buffeting the little car, chilling him. He rolled up the window. After a while he came among pines, scrubby at first, scattered, twisted by winds, and then growing closer together, straighter, taller. They sheltered the little town, a clutch of shake-sided houses, a fieldstone filling station, a raw plank stable that rented out horses, a general store and post office with a long wooden-covered porch, a bat and board cafe, beer in small red neon in a window. From between the pumps of the filling station, a white-eyed husky barked at the Triumph as it passed. The music camp was 5 miles further on, a loose collection of raw pine buildings in a meadow. One of the buildings was large, 2-storied, with glass in its windows, probably the dormitory and mess hall. The rest were 1 or 2 room practice sheds. Downhill, beyond a screen of pines, could be seen the lofting wooden arc of an orchestra shell. A faded, dented gremlin stood under a big ponderosa pine beside the farthest of the practice sheds. Snow lay under the car. Dave pulled the Triumph up behind him and got out stiffly into the cold air. He looked through the doorway into the little building. No piano. Not now. A sleeping bag in a far corner, propped beside it a duffel bag, flap open. He turned and looked all around the little meadow. No sign of anyone. He called Lyle Westover's name. It came back to him in echoes from the silent slopes. He poked his head into the other practice sheds, empty. His heels knocked hollowly. Then he climbed into the log-railed porch of the main building. From their solidity, when he pounded on the plank double doors, he judged they were barred. Vacant rooms sent back the noise of his fist. The car was unlocked. Nothing unexpected, nothing that gave answers in the shed. He rummaged through the duffel bag. Underwear, sweaters, wool shirts, corduroys, also cans, baked beans, beef stew, Spam, a jar of instant coffee, crackers, a roll of toilet paper. 50 feet behind the shed, charred sticks lay on a circle of blackened stones. The bottom of the gray enamel coffee pot was smoky. Pine needles floated in an inch of coffee in a gray enamel cup. In an unwashed steel skillet lay an unwashed steel fork. Downhill, a patch of duff had been scraped away. He dug there with a fallen pine branch. The hole held empty cans, labels still fresh. Snow began to fall on them. He covered them and went back to the shed. The sleeping bag was heavy when he picked it up. When he shook it, a pair of boots fell out. Dave scowled. What the hell could he have gone in his stocking feet? He stepped down out of the shed. The snow was falling, harder now. "Lyle!" he shouted. "Lyle!" and headed for the orchestra shell. He turned up the sheepskin collar, hunched his shoulders, jammed his hands into the jacket pockets. He went down the center aisle, looking along the rows of pine log benches. He hiked himself up on the stage. The cement cold to his hands. Doors to storage rooms. Dressing rooms? Open at either side of the shell, but they were padlocked. He used the shell to amplify his voice and shouted Lyle's name out into the snowfall. It sounded very loud in his ears, but no answer came. His ears were so cold they ached. He covered his ears with his hands and climbed back up the aisle. At the top, he shouted the boy's name again, once to each point of the compass. He thought of following his voice out among the big pines, but the snow fell in dense earnest now. It was hard to see through. One man didn't make a search party anyway, not in country this big and empty. One man could get lost and freeze to death. He went back to his car. In the little town, the windows of the cafe smiled yellow through the snowfall. It was only noon, but the snowfall made it dark. He parked beside a battered pickup truck and entered the cafe through a door hung with little bells that jingled. The air inside was warm, steamy, and smelled of cooking. A pair of leathery men, one old, one young, both in cowboy hats and quilted khaki jackets, sat at a counter shoving down meatloaf, mashed potatoes, gravy, green peas. Thick white mugs of coffee steamed in front of them. They glanced at Dave and away again, seeing he was a stranger. A plump, motherly-looking woman in starchy print dress, new cardigan sweater, patched white apron, chatted through a service window with someone unseen in the kitchen. She looked at Dave with more interest than the customers had done. Dave laid a bill on the counter. "Can I have a cup of coffee and change, please, for the telephone?" It was screwed, black and battered, to the wall at the far end of the room. The woman took the bill and jangled open the cash register. She laid coins in his hand. She gave him a lovely, false-teeth smile. "You look half frozen," she said. "You drove through only an hour ago. I thought then you'd be cold. It's that cloth top. That's a cute little car, but you can't expect to keep warm in it. Not in Buenos Ventos in the winter." "The coffee," Dave begged. Coming right up. The directory that hung on a chain off the phone was tattered, dog-eared, food-stained, but he found the San Diego County offices section and a number that looked as if it might be the right one. The motherly woman brought a mug of coffee to the end of the counter and set it there for him. She didn't go away. She stood watching him with open curiosity. The phone kept ringing at the far end, and Dave stretched to try to reach the coffee mug. She picked it up and handed it to him. He burned his mouth on the coffee. It had come out of an ordinary cafe glass pot, but it tasted like farmhouse coffee. The heat of it made him shiver. He was colder than he'd realized. At last a voice came on the line. "Sheriff Station. Guzman speaking." Dave gave his name, said he was an insurance investigator, and wanted to report a missing person. "From the music camp at Buenos Ventos?" Yes, he knew it was closed, but this boy had been holed up in one of the sheds. His gear is all there. Clothes, even boots, and his car is there. But he's nowhere around. It's snowing hard up here. Somebody ought to try to find him. The name, Lyle Westover. Age about 19, slight build. A hand tugged Dave's shoulder, and he turned. The motherly woman was shaking her head. "Don't bother," she said. "Sir," the voice on the line said, "are you there?" "Yes, just a second." Dave covered the mouthpiece. He asked the woman what she meant. "Isn't he the little one that can't talk right?" she asked. Dave nodded. She said, "I thought so. You get to know them all here in the summer." "You know where he is? Is that what you're saying?" "In the hospital at Cascada," she said. Dave said into the telephone, "I'm sorry. False alarm. I'm at the cafe here in town. They've located him for me. Excuse the trouble. No problem, sir. The line went dead. Dave hung up. At least, the woman said, I guess that fat girl took him to the hospital. She come running in here asking where the nearest one was. I know her too. Trio, they call her. She laughed. I guess because she's bigger than any three of the rest of them. When was this? Dave said. Said she had somebody in the car, very sick, and she had to get them to a hospital right away. Last night, around 6. Busy in here, but she was scared. Plain to see that I told her the way to Cascada. She was so jittery, I wasn't sure she took in what I said. She was out that door before the words were hardly out of my mouth. I ran after her to yell the directions to her all over again, and that was when I saw who it was that was sick. Passed out cold, head over against the window. Oh, he was pale, white as a ghost, blue around the mouth. Frail little thing. Anyway, you know. Dave drank more of the scalding coffee, set the mug down. She hasn't come back, of course. She went up first in the morning. I saw her pass. Saw her come down, too. Not more than an hour after. She tore right on through. Lickety-split. I guess I was busy when she drove up. There the second time. Never saw her. Then, of course, here she came. Barging in, wild-eyed, out of breath. Quick. Where was the nearest hospital? Thanks, Dave said. Oh, where is it? Cascadia huddled dreary in cold rain. Its main street storefronts were red brick, brown brick, feed and grain, hardware, drugstore. Modern, crisp, lettered white plastic signs gleamed. So did the windows at McDonald's and the Pizza Hut. But no one was around, and the effect was sad. He found the hospital at the end of Main Street, where the motherly woman had told him it would be. A new sand-colored stucco building with a white rock roof, 1 story, maybe 20 rooms. The lawn around it was bright with new grass. The plantings of eucalyptus trees, young and lacy. He left the Triumph on the new blacktop of a parking lot, almost empty, glossy with rain. Plate glass doors led him into a shiny little reception area. An elderly nurse pointed him down a hallway. In the hallway he found Anna Westover, seated on a stiff, minimally upholstered armchair and looking drawn and bitter. What are you doing here? She said. I told you I was looking for him, Dave said. He's in a coma, she said. He tried to kill himself with sleeping pills. God, that child. Her voice shook on the big, soft leather bag in her lap. Her thin hands clutched each other so tightly the knuckles shone white. She was angry, at Lyle or at herself. What in the world is the use? It was a cry from the heart. She looked up at Dave with tears in her eyes. You struggle to raise them, to understand them, to make life easy for them, to train them, not to make the stupid mistakes you've made. And what in the world is the use? If you did all that, Dave said, you don't have anything to reproach yourself for. He's a big boy now. He sat down on another of the stinging chairs. A low table was between the chairs. On it, a jug-shaped terracotta lamp. Old copies of Westways and Sunset magazines. A terracotta ashtray glazed blue inside. What does the doctor say? That he'll probably be all right, she muttered it, rummaging in the big bag for tissues, wiping her eyes, blowing her nose. But what's to stop him trying again? If life is so terrible for him. A squeaky sob jerked out of her. She drew breath sharply, bit her lip, shook her head, squared her shoulders. Did you find his father? No, I hoped Lyle could tell me where to do that. Down the hallway, crockery and metal clashed. A bald, red-faced orderly in rumpled white brought trays out of rooms and dumped them into rubber bins on a trolley. Dave lit a cigarette. Trio Foley brought him here. Where is she? Eating, Anna Westover said flatly. Every hour on the hour. It comforts her, I suppose. She feels terribly guilty, poor thing. She blames herself. He had been mistaken in thinking the Pizza Hut was empty. She sat at a rear table whose shiny orange top reflected into her face, made the pimples stand out. A wheel of pizza lay in front of her, heaped with, as the white plastic letters of the sign over the counter put it, everything. 3 wedges of the pizza were already gone, and she was choking down a 4th. Dave sat across from her. Oh, God. Her eyes opened behind the thick glasses. I thought you were going to telephone me. She gulped the mouthful of dough and sauce. Cheese sausage, anchovies. She drank from a big wax paper cup of cola. Tomato sauce smeared her mouth and chin. She wiped them with a wadded fistful of paper napkins. She said, I was afraid you'd frighten him. Why? I didn't frighten you. Her dimpled fingers fumbled loose on another slice of pizza. She lifted it toward her mouth. He caught her wrist. Wait a minute with the eating, please. Tell me what happened. He'd been living up there at the camp, cooking and eating and getting along. Then you showed up, and he swallowed seconals. Now, what's it all about, Trio? I told him. Her cry ricocheted off the shiny glass and plastic of the empty place. The blonde boy and girl in uniform behind the counter stopped chatting and stared. I went to make him leave there before you could find him, but he didn't want to. Then I did just what I was afraid of. You do. I didn't mean to, but one thing led to another. Why had I come, and who were you, and what were you doing at the house, and why were you an insurance investigator, and it all just came out, about his father and his sister and the insurance, and she couldn't go on. She picked up the pizza wedge and stuffed her face with it and sat there with tears streaming down her face, chewing. And then you ran away, Dave said, leaving him all by himself with the knowledge that either his sister had been horribly murdered, or his father was so rotten that he had tried to defraud the insurance people by pretending he believed that had happened. Good Christ, girl. You were the one who said he was fragile. Who wanted to protect him? Stop it! She clamped her hands to her ears. Stop it! She had to wriggle mightily to free her bulk from the cramped space between table and banquet. But she did it with surprising quickness, and was on her feet and running for the door, all jiggling 200 pounds of her, wailing like a siren. Dave sighed, got up, walked after her. Hey, mister! Wait a minute! It was the blonde boy behind the counter, rosy-cheeked, maybe 17, but brave. What happened? What'd you do to her? Gave her bad news, Dave said, not gently enough. The boy looked doubtful. He glanced at the blonde girl. She nodded toward an orange telephone gleaming on a kitchen wall. Dave didn't wait for them to call the police. He pushed out into the rain and trudged after the wide, wobbling figure of Trio, running away from him down the sad, empty street. When he caught up to her, she was hunched in a hospital hallway chair, trying to stop crying, Anna Westover bending over her, murmuring comfort. The woman glared at Dave. You bring joy wherever you go, she said. Trio, Dave said. You saved his life. The mistake doesn't count. You fixed it. He's going to be all right. She looked up at him, reproachful, face sleek with tears, glasses smeared with tears. She hiccuped. I'm still hungry, she said, and burst out crying again. He did look fragile, as if the least little tap would shatter him. Against the hospital pillows, his thin face was sickly pale. With a stubble of dark beard, his hair curled, soft as a child's. On his elegant skull, his eyes were large brown, sorrowful. As Trio had said, he was beautiful, and looking at him made you want to shelter him. Yet his wide, mobile mouth was able to smile. The smile was a sheepish for the trouble he caused, but it was real. Dave was alone with him now. He had left the hospital at midnight, checked into a motel, tried to telephone Cecil, and got no answer. Had slept hard anyway. He'd headed back here through gray drizzle at 7. Passing the steamy plate glass of bright McDonald's, he had glimpsed Trio stowing away scrambled eggs and muffins. He'd met Anna Westover wearily crossing the hospital parking lot to her car on her way back to L.A. to look after other people's children. She told him Lyle was awake, out of danger, calm, apologetic, and able to talk, if that was the word for it. From the look of the tray beside Lyle's bed, he'd been able to eat. His talk came out mostly vowels. Dave looked around for paper and pencil so the boy could write his answers. Pencil and paper were there. None. So he strained to understand, and before long he didn't have to ask Lyle to repeat. At least not everything. The cap came off, and they spilled all over the bathroom. He was saying now, I was in a hurry to get out of here, away from him. I almost left the pills, but I felt like dying. I was so ashamed, and I knew him. He'd do something even worse next time. I didn't want to know about it, so I picked them up and put them in my pocket. But you change your mind at the camp. It's beautiful there, and far away, and quiet. I could think, well, why should I take them? Whatever I did, he'd go on trying to save himself any dirty way he could. I wouldn't change him by dying. I was getting ready to go home. And then Trio showed up and told me this thing he'd done about Serenity, and I got hysterical again, and she got scared and ran, and I took the pills. I began to get very cold, and I crawled into the sleeping bag, and I was drifting off, and I realized I still had my boots on. It seemed very important to get those boots off, and that's the last I remember. He tried to smile at himself. You got them off? Dave said. Tell me, what had your father done to make you so ashamed? You and he rented a truck that night. Was that part of it? Lyle said 2 words. Dave couldn't make them out. He must have looked blank because Lyle repeated them slowly, working his beautiful mouth, frowning with the effort. Howie O'Rourke. You know about him. He and your father were writing a book, Dave said. Publishers kept turning it down, Lyle said. He wasn't going to get him the money he wanted. You were giving him money? Dave said. Lyle made a face. After the house payments, we were lucky to have anything left over for food. He had to have $200,000. Thought he had to clear the title of the house, Dave said. So he could sell it and get out from under. Explained the truck. How he found a way to get the money. Crooked, of course. He'd run into a man he'd known in prison who had a truckload of hijacked stereo equipment. He couldn't sell himself because the police were watching him. Excuse me, Dave said. A truckload of what? It took a minute, but Lyle made him understand. There was $200,000 worth of it, hidden in an old warehouse. The man only wanted $20,000 for it. Only? Did your father have that kind of money? No. Lyle looked at the rainy window. Tears started down his face. That was what made me want to die. He got it from Don Gellard. He drew a long, wobbly breath. I don't know who that is, Dave said. The nicest man that ever walked, Lyle said. My father's oldest friend. When I was little, I thought he was my uncle. He wasn't. They were just very close. In high school, college, law school. Lyle's hands lay on the coverlet, which was threadbare, bleached from too many washings. The beautiful thin fingers moved running silent scales. He watched them for a moment, then gave Dave a wan smile. I wasn't too happy when I was small. My father was very busy making money, and my mother never forgave me for not being able to talk right. Oh, she tried not to let it show, but I knew. I was really surprised to see her here. She wants you to live. She wants you to be happy. It's not easy, is it? Lyle said. Not for her, Dave said. Not when you act this way. I didn't think it was my father who was on my mind. Did you admire your father? When Dave nodded, Lyle said, Riley. So did I. Then there wasn't anything to admire anymore. He drew another shaky breath. Anyway, I loved Don. He had time for us. We loved having Don come over. So he was almost a member of the family, Dave said. Well, why shouldn't your father go to him for a loan? Isn't that what friends are for? To be there? When we need them. Only they hadn't been friends, not for years and years. The break was sudden. Serenity and I couldn't understand where was Uncle Don, and they told us to forget Uncle Don. Never mentioned Uncle Don again. I was too young to understand, but I figured out after a while that Don must have told my father he didn't like the way he was going. Criminal law. All that. He got out of law himself, began building furniture in his basement, which made him poor. Didn't it? At least not like the crowd my parents were in. The beach club, all that, big cars, the best of everything. Old Don just didn't belong, did he? They hadn't spoken in years. That's it, Lal nodded disgust. I couldn't believe my father would be so creepy. Don isn't rich, he works hard for his money, works with his hands. But he had it, Dave said, and he gave it. Gladly. He'd give my father anything. That's how Don is. The kindest man, kindest man. It probably was every cent he'd saved in his life. So you went to the warehouse with the truck and Don Gillard's $20,000 to pick up the loot? Not the money. My father had already passed that to Howie to pay his jailbird friend. Howie was supposed to meet us at the warehouse. Why us? Why'd your father take you? To help with the loading, someone he could trust. I said he was doing wrong, he'd be caught and go back to prison. It was a stupid risk, he wouldn't listen. I had to go, didn't I? I couldn't let him go alone. And Howie wasn't there, was he? And the warehouse was empty. It was a con game, wasn't it? How could your father have fallen for it, knowing Howie the way he did? He couldn't believe Howie would do it to him. We sat out there in the dark, waiting and waiting. Howie was sure to show up. Hell, hadn't he taken my father around and introduced him to the man that was going to fence the stuff? I was sick. Don's money gone with that creep Howie. Maybe that was why your father filed that insurance claim, to get Gellard his money back. Maybe, but that was even worse. Don't you see? That was what had happened to my father. Anything for money. You don't know where he's gone, Dave said. Maybe he told me. He was trying to talk to me, get me to forgive him. He was crying. I wouldn't listen. I was throwing my stuff in that duffel bag. All I wanted was out. He was crying outside the bathroom door while I was picking up those stupid pills. If he said, I didn't hear him. But he was still home when you left, Dave said. And when Lyle nodded, he said, reporting him missing as soon as you get home. Sheriff? Missing persons? It could help. All right, sure. Lyle looked at the door. It had opened. Trio filled the frame in her bulgy jeans and striped Mexican pullover. Lyle smiled at her. She lifted her flute. It glinted in the pale, rainy light. Music, she said. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.